Have you ever felt curious after knowing that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah really existed? Where would these cities be found? The location of these cities on the plain. Now, if you did, and today is the day we are going to find the answer. I'm Dr. Raj, a Old Testament scholar and a Christian minister. Today we are going to look at this question, Sodom and Gomorrah. Where were they located? We will look at the Bible. We will look at evidences coming from history, archaeology, early church history, and different other sources. Come and join this journey of trying to find the place in which they once existed. Now let's get on to the video. The question is this: if Sodom and Gomorrah really existed, where were they located? Those who hold on to the view that Sodom and Gomorrah were atheological myths, they were made up stories. They do not concern about the historical location of these cities. On the other hand, those who hold the view that these cities were real, as we established through our historical process in the last video, we go on to ask the next question. If these cities once existed, if they were real, then where were they located? We can look at four evidences from four different areas. First one, we will look at the Bible. Then we will look at cartographic evidences. Then we will look at ancient historians, both secular as well as Christian. And we will look at archaeological expedition and discoveries from the past. Let's go in this order: Bible, cartography, historians, and archaeology. Bible and the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. Here we will look at 5 significant Bible passages as they relate to the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. The first reference is from Genesis 10:19. Cities of the plain and the borders, southern borders of Canaan. And the borders of Canaan reached from Sidon toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. Now, Adele Berlin, one of the Old Testament scholars, she said this in reference to Genesis 10:19. Since Sodom and Gomorrah are said to mark the borders of Canaan in Genesis 10:19, it is possible to identify them as Western Canaanites, and hence the descendants of Ham, one of the sons of Noah. Now, J.A. Loder, a very important book, The Tale of Two Cities, Sodom and Gomorrah in the Old Testament, early Jewish and early Christian traditions, he tackles this same verse, Genesis 10:19. He says this: as it stands, the reference to the cities occurs in the description of a geographical line from the northwest of Canaan to the southwest and then to the southeast. According to the description offered here, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim fall outside the territory of Canaan. Look at this underlined section: northwest of Canaan to the southwest and thence to the southeast. That's how geographically it is logical to see the progression. Now, let's take a look at this map. It talks about Sidon in the northwest and Gaza and Gerar. These are the two towns of the Philistines. They are located on the southwest. And then it moves on to Zeboim and Lasha, so which is very close to the southern region, as you can see. Now, the identity of Lasha is unknown. Some people locate it close to the Lishon, the tongue-like region in the Dead Sea, where others, they try to identify that in connection to Zoar, which is the 5th city, usually referred in other locations. But however, if you see the geographical progression moving from northwest to the southwest and then to the southeast, probably the cities of the plain were located around that region. A second reference from Genesis 13:11. This is what it says: So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abraham and Lot separated. Lot saw the whole region, the whole valley of Jordan, from where he was when he discussed with Abraham. And then he set out toward the east. These references are very important. So This point is this: Lot saw the 5 cities along the Jordan Dead Sea Valley. Now, Abraham and Lot, they pitched their tent between Bethel and Ai when they were having this conversation about the future of their partnership or relationship. Now, when Lot decided to move, he moved east towards the whole plain of Jordan, it says. Now, this region is known as Dead Sea, Jordan Valley, from the Sea of Galilee all the way to the northern region of the Dead Sea. The land between these is known as the Jordan Valley or Jordan Valley proper. But at the same time, we need to understand the geology of this region. Look at the Sea of Galilee in the north. And there is a great rift that is running from Sea of Galilee all the way through the Dead Sea to the Gulf of Aqaba. And this rift continues to run across this sea into the African continent, which is known as Syro-African Depression or Syro-African Rift. It goes all the way to the Great Rift Valley in African continent. So if you think of this valley, there are two ways people look at it. Some scholars, they think the valley, the reference to the whole plain of Jordan, as just the Jordan Valley proper, between the Sea of Galilee and the northern region of the Dead Sea. Some other scholars, they look at the sea of the valley, the reference to the plain, as the Jordan Dead Sea Valley, not just limiting it to the northern area. Third reference comes from Genesis 14 verses 8 and 10. Here we have a reference to Valley of Siddhi. It could refer to the Dead Sea Valley. See, verse 8, it says, Then the king of Sodom marched out and drew up their battle lines in the Valley of Siddhi. Now the Valley of Siddhi was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. So this talks about a region where there is valley as well as hills. And then also there are a lot of tar pits. Let's turn our attention to this Valley of Siddhi. Only 3 places in Genesis chapter 14 we have this word Siddhi, Valley of Siddhi. Is that a reference to the fields, Valley of the Fields, a green valley with a lot of fields? Targum Neophyte, an Aramaic translation, it translates the Valley of Siddhi as Valley of the Gardens. The word gardens, literally, the Aramaic word there is pardesia, which refers to paradise. We have already noted in our previous video that pointed out this fact that when Lot looked at this region, he saw the whole region just like the land of Eden, just like the paradise. Again, we see that reference coming in Targum Neophyte. Vulgate translates it, the Valley of Siddhi, as Vallis Sylvester, the woodland valley. Now, Bible identifies the Valley of Siddhi with the Dead Sea in 14:3. It says, in the Valley of Siddhi, which is by the Sea of Salt. Sea of Salt is the word that Bible uses to call the Dead Sea. Yam Hamela, the Sea of Salt or Salt Sea. Now, look at these images. The first one is the satellite image of the Dead Sea. And the last image is where I have pointed out these 2 regions where the arrows are pointing. This is where usually the Valley of Siddhi is located. The red dots on the western side of the Dead Sea represents the presence of slime pits or tar pits. Genesis chapter 19:28, the 4th reference from Bible. Abraham looked down from Hebron Mamre towards south of the Dead Sea. Early the next morning, Abraham got up. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. Look at this reference. Look down towards Sodom. So from the place where Abraham was, he was able to see the region of Sodom downward. Let's look at this map. The blue color on the right, that is where you see Dead Sea, and the arrow points towards Sodom, the location of Abraham, from where he looked at Sodom. So Abraham lived in Mamre, pointed in the arrow, where Sodom and Gomorrah were, when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Now, the region of Hebron, around that region, is less fertile compared to the valley of the Jordan. See the contrast in colors, you can see that. Now, Abraham, living in the highlands, he was probably looking down towards the southern or the southeastern region of the Dead Sea. As far as he could see, the entire land was full of smoke, like a smoke of a furnace. The fifth reference is from Genesis chapter 19, 18 to 23. Here we have the references about Zoar. Now, this is the point. Zoar must have been situated close to Sodom. Verse 18, it says, "But Lot said to them, the angels, I can't flee to the mountains. Look, here is a town near enough to run to." So Lot was living in Sodom, and he said to the angels, "Here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it." In verse 23, it says, "By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land." So what do we understand about Zoar from these verses? 1. From Sodom, Lot could reach Zoar in a short time. Number 2, and he says that it is near enough to run to. He is very direct. And also we can understand that this town was not destroyed, and it is a very small town. Now, Zoar is one of the 5 cities of the plain. Whenever the name of the 5 cities mentioned, Zoar is mentioned at the last. But Zoar was not destroyed. Attempts have been made to locate Zoar. So traditionally, the location of Zoar has been identified around the southern tip of Dead Sea, around this region. Let's do a quick Bible recap. The first reference, it tells us that cities of plain are found along the southern borders of Canaan. Second reference tells that Lot saw the 5 cities along the Jordan Dead Sea Valley. Third reference tells us that Valley of Siddhi could refer to the Dead Sea Valley. Fourth reference, it tells that Abraham looked to the east from Hebron, which is Mamre, south of the Dead Sea. Fifth reference, Zoar is located around the southern end of the Dead Sea. Let's take a look at the cartographic evidence and the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. Cartography is the study of map. Now, there is one important map that relates to the location of Sodom and Gomorrah is found in the city of Madaba in Jordan. This is 15 miles from the Dead Sea. As you can see, the Dead Sea is located very close to the city of Madaba. In the city of Madaba, there is a map on the floor of St. George Church in Madaba, Jordan. This map was discovered in 1884, but it was brought to public knowledge only around 1896. This map is made up of 2 million pieces of tiles, the mosaic tiles. And this map is a testament to the early Christian cartographic prowess, their awareness of topography, and so on. This map is dated around AD 560. It is helpful for scholars, archaeologists to identify several locations in Israel. In fact, some of the archaeological digs were benefited by the information found in this map. Scholars speculate that this map might have been based on the work of Eusebius, one of the very respected early church historian, particularly his book called Onomasticon, or On the Place Names in Holy Scripture, in which he kind of catalogs several locations in the Holy Land, and then gives description about those places. So probably this map heavily drew from that information, or directly based on it. Now this is the portion, the existing portion of the Madaba map. Some part of it got destroyed when they rebuilt the church because it was on the floor, and some part of it got destroyed, but this is the preserved part. This region marked in yellow, that is where we are able to see the reference to Zoar. You can see on the left Jordan River flowing into the Dead Sea, and this is the entire Dead Sea at the southern southeastern corner. That is where we see Zoar, reference to Zoar. Let's take a closer look. Now here, around this, between these palm trees, that is where you see a reference to Zoar. It says it locates Zoar at the southeast side of the Dead Sea. Actually, it's written there as Zoara. Probably Zoara was the Byzantine name of that place. Now, from the reference where it says that Lot ran to the city of Zoar, it says that Zoar was in the vicinity of Sodom. And so it could either be located on the east side or on the west side of the Dead Sea. Some scholars even say that these cities were found underwater, submerged around the southern part of the Dead Sea. Now move on to the next one. We will look at the evidences from historians, both secular as well as church historians, what they say about the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. First, we look at Tacitus. Tacitus, in his book History, he makes a reference to the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. He says this: not far from the lake Dead Sea is the plain which, according to report, was once fertile and the site of the cities. Now look at this, not far from the lake. He hints to a general location. He says not far from the Dead Sea, it's much closer. That's all the sense we get from Tacitus. It is associated with the Dead Sea, closer to the Dead Sea. Second, we see Jewish Roman historian Josephus. He says, adjacent to the Sea of Asphaltites, Dead Sea is the land of Sodom. Again, he talks about the geographical proximity of Sodom to the Dead Sea. Josephus was there in this region. He visited some of these places. He was in Masada. He was at the southern end of the Dead Sea. When he talks about Lot's wife, he mentions that he visited the very place where the pillar of salt stands. So he knew this region firsthand, adjacent to the sea, close to the Dead Sea. Strabo, the geographer, in his book Geography, he says, the country of the Sodomites is fiery, for near Masada are to be seen rugged rocks that have been scorched, as if scorched by fire. Now his reference to Masada is very significant, because we know exactly the location of Masada. Strabo's reference to Masada points to the area close to the southern region of the Dead Sea. Now, there is a very interesting connection. Today, when people go to visit the Promised Land, one location is told to them as Mount Sodom. It's located south of Masada, around this region. The popular tourist site of Jebel Uzdum, or Mount Sodom, is located south of Masada in the vicinity, in the surrounding of the Dead Sea. You can see this region, the current tourist attraction, is located very close to the Dead Sea, and it is south of Masada. Okay, next we move on to Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the early church historian and bishop of Caesarea. Eusebius Monomasticon catalogs biblical sites, cities, villages with accompanying physical description, location, biblical citation about the site, ethnic composition of population, and so on. So mainly two references we can take from Eusebius. One, when he talks about Sodom, he says, he refers to it as Sodoma, city of the wicked men, near the Dead Sea. Pay attention to the near the Dead Sea. It concurs with the secular historians that Sodom was located close to the Dead Sea. And Bela, which is Segor, it is now called Zura or Zoara or Zoar. It is now inhabited, remains still in the vicinity of the Dead Sea. It is now inhabited at the time of writing by Eusebius. It was still inhabited in the vicinity of the Dead Sea. So both Sodom as well as Zoar, Eusebius locates it very close to the Dead Sea, which is congruent to the references coming from secular historians. And we also look at one more Christian writer, very prolific early Christian writer, heresiologist Tertullian. Tertullian, in his book De Paleo, he makes a very lengthy reference about Sodom. At the end of it, he says this: all has turned into ashes, and the soil is living its death along with the nearby sea. So he is making reference to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and their closeness, proximity to the nearby sea, near Dead Sea. Again, he agrees with the historians in this regard. Now, in general, secular historians as well as early Christian writers, they all identify the location of Sodom closer to the Dead Sea. Right? Everyone talks about the adjacent to the Dead Sea, not far from the Dead Sea, closer to the Dead Sea, in the vicinity of the Dead Sea. So we get this idea. They're all locating it close to the Dead Sea. Very useful is the reference that's coming from Strabo to Masada, because we know the specific location of Masada on the southwestern side of Dead Sea. Now let's move on from general to specific. Let's go to archaeology. Archaeology and the location of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, at least 3 sites have been excavated in the past in relation to Sodom and Gomorrah. One is Bab Edra, another one is Numeira, another one is Tal El Hammam. Let's look at each one of them individually. In 1924, William Foxwell Albright, he identified this site called Bab Edra. William Foxwell Albright is known as father of biblical archaeology. So he identified this site, and when he digged this site, he identified it as a burial site, not a city where people lived, but rather it is a burial site, a cultic festival center. But there was a break in the usage of this region. So according to Albert, he theorized that the cities of the plain used Bab Edra as a cultic festival center. So once the city got destroyed, and there was no one to visit this place, and the place was eventually abandoned. So he surmised 5 dried riverbeds at the southern end of the Dead Sea may have been the source of water for the 5 cities. Now, in his view, the cities were now submerged under the waters of Dead Sea, particularly on the southern region. Now, according to him, when these cities were destroyed, they got buried under the water, and then the Bab Edra, which the people used as a religious cultic center, was unused and abandoned. There was some criticism against Foxwell's view. Number one, underwater exploration in the southern end of Dead Sea did not yield any result. So we have no evidence to see buried cities at the southern end of the Dead Sea. No mention of cities were found when southern end of Dead Sea dried in 1979, except exposing a Roman highway. So Foxwell's theory did not hold up in the successive years, coming years, when people tried to follow his lead and look for further evidences. That takes us to the next group, or next expedition that took place in 1973, Rast and Shoub. They basically expanded on the work of William Albright. So additionally, they found 4 more cities south of Bab Edra. They were all located near to the streams, as you can see in the map. They retitled the Bab Edra as Sodom, and then they found 4 other cities. So altogether they got 5 cities. The 5 cities, Bab Edra as Sodom, Numeira as Gomorrah, Safi as Zoar, and Haifa and Kanazir as Adma and Zeboim. So these cities in this region, identified by Rast and Shoub, They all resembled in layout, walls, pottery, and manner of destruction by fire. But there is a criticism against their findings. Except the number 5, there were 5 cities they identified. There were no other exciting correlations. Oh, they found 5 cities, but is there anything more? No, the information did not match beyond a certain similarities. Destruction is dated to early Bronze Age, which is several hundred years before the time of the patriarchs. The places Babedra and other places got destroyed much earlier than the time of Abraham. Gomorrah was destroyed at least 200 years prior to Babedra. So if Sodom and Gomorrah, Babedra and Gomorrah were Sodom and Gomorrah, these 2 cities were not destroyed at the same time. When they tried to date these cities, they were destroyed in different periods of time. So they were not able to come to a conclusive point to say that these were cities, they all got destroyed at the same time as the Bible says. We do not have that sort of a confirmation from this archaeological dig. The most recent archaeological expedition started from 2005. It continues till today. Dr. Stephen Collins, he locates the site of the cities of Plain in the north. You see, the first 2 expeditions focused on the southern region. Now, Dr. Stephen Collins, he takes the view that these cities were found in the northern region. So he takes Lot's geographical position as a very useful guide. So we know that Abraham and Lot were stationed between Bethel and Ai, which is just above Jericho. So Lot looked from Bethel Ai to the east across the Jordan River. And then he saw this entire plain, the Hebrew word kikar, or the circular disc, the region, circular region, the valley. So they take the reference to plain as the Jordan Valley proper, which is very close to the northern region of the Dead Sea. Stephen Collins identified Tel El Hammam or Tal El Hammam in Jordan as the largest Bronze Age city north of Dead Sea. After the city was destroyed, it was uninhabited. And in fact, the city was destroyed by some high heat event. Collins suggests that Moses and Israelites could have walked through the destruction of Tal El Hammam in their journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. So as they were walking across beyond this region, seeing the ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah or Tal El Hammam, they could be reminded of the fact that they need to keep the commands of God more strictly when they enter into the Promised Land. Philip J. Silva, he's a director of scientific analysis at Tal El Hammam Exploration Project. He's a current director. In a recent personal correspondence through Academia, this is what he wrote to me. He said, the identification of Tal El Hammam as Sodom has gained much traction, particularly recent times. We have also identified candidate sites for Gomorrah as Tal Kephrion, Adma as Tal Nimrin, and Ziboim, Tal's Belibel, and Musta. So Philip J. Silva thinks that people begin to accept Tal El Hammam as Sodom. But there are criticism against this view as well. Criticism comes from both from geography as well as chronology. Geography, the northern location seems to have no support from tradition, historians, or ancient sources. It's when historians talk about, they talk about close to the sea and close to Masada, you see. So that talks about the southern region, the southeastern part of the Dead Sea. Chronology, when they date the destruction of Tal El Hammam, they date it somewhere around 1600 BC, later than the patriarchal period. If Gomorrah and Babedra was dated earlier, Tal El Hammam is dated later, much later. Eugene Merrill, very important Old Testament scholar, says this: both archaeological and biblical chronological data rule out Hammam as a candidate for patriarchal Sodom. Now, in fact, he says that if we take the date proposed, then the entire biblical timeline has to be changed. And that's a very serious situation to consider. Now, archaeological explorations over the past centuries have given us greater understanding of the region. Archaeologists continue their quest for more specific and persuasive evidences to prove their case. They continue to explore, they continue to look for any inscriptional evidence or any specific evidence that can help them tie together the stories of the Bible as well as the evidences coming from archaeology. Now let's return to the question, if Sodom and Gomorrah really existed, where were they located? We looked at 5 selected biblical passages. We also looked at cartographic evidences coming from Madaba mosaic map from the city of Madaba in Jordan. We looked at ancient, secular, as well as church historians. And also we looked at 3 archaeological excavations. And from all of this, what do we understand is that the location is associated with the Jordan Dead Sea Valley. It's found in the vicinity, in the surrounding of the Dead Sea. Most likely, all these references lead us to the location in the southern region around the Dead Sea. Did you find the answer to your question? I'm sure you did. What do you think about the location of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? Do you think they were located in the south of the Dead Sea, or they were located in the north, in the site called Tel El Hammam? So what do you think about it? And please tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. And also the next video is going to be about the manner of their destruction, how these cities were destroyed. Bible says that God rained fire on these cities. How did that happen? So we are going to look at that question in detail, in depth. So please stay tuned. I will see you very soon. May God bless you. Until we see again, take care. Bye-bye.